My name is Fonda Sutton. I was 32 years old, and I drove 640 miles to a surprise party that turned out to be an ambush. My husband texted me to come home that Saturday. He said he had a surprise. I brought our 13-month-old daughter and a diaper bag. And when I opened my own front door, every relative he has was already sitting there in folding chairs, and not one of them stood up. He dropped a stapled lab report on the coffee table and told the room our daughter wasn't his. My mother-in-law pointed at the door and told me to leave, right now. And then the front door opened behind me, and I want to be honest with you up front because I know what you're hoping. The person who walked in was not there to save me. But here's what none of them knew. That lab report wasn't fake. The lab didn't make a single mistake. And in about 6 weeks, I was going to explain the difference to 90 people. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge. This is the channel for the quiet ones, the people who didn't defend themselves in the room because they were already busy writing down the date. If that's you, or if that's somebody you love, stay with me on this one. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. I'm a captain in the United States Army, 9 years in, commissioned out of ROTC at Penn State on a scholarship because nobody in my family had the money to send me anywhere. I'm a logistics officer, which most people hear as paperwork, and which is actually the job of knowing where every single thing is, and who has it, and when it moved. 2 deployments. I brief at 05:30 to people who haven't had coffee yet, and that teaches you exactly one skill, which is to say, the true thing first and the rest of it after. I'm stationed at Fort Campbell in Kentucky. My daughter Marlo lives there with me in post-housing, and she went to the Child Development Center on base 5 days a week while I worked. My husband Grady lived in Bellwood, Pennsylvania, in our house, running my grandmother's store. That's not as strange as it sounds. The Army calls it a geographic bachelor, and about a third of the people I know live some version of it. He came down when he could. I went up on leave. It's 640 miles between those 2 front doors. 10 hours. More like 11 with a 13-month-old who has strong feelings about her car seat. Hold on to that number. 640 miles. It's the entire story, and I didn't know that yet. Sutton Feed and Hardware sits at 41 Main Street in Bellwood, Pennsylvania, and it opened in May of 1966. My grandfather hung a bell over that door the week they opened, and it's still there. My grandmother, Ollie Sutton, ran it for 40 years after he died, and she stood behind that counter until she was 86. She passed in 2023 at 89, and her will left the building, the 40 acres behind it, and every bolt of inventory to me. Just me. About $610,000 all in, if you're the kind of person who counts it that way, and my husband was. Here's the part I have to say out loud because it's true, and because leaving it out would make me a liar. For 2 years, Grady was the one who opened that store at 6:30 in the morning. Every morning, he built the online side from nothing. He landed the biggest ag chemical account in 2 counties. He took a dying store and doubled the revenue. And I am not exaggerating, and I am not being generous. He was good at it. He was better at it than my grandmother was at the end. And the sign over the door said Sutton. In September of 2025, I put the store into a single-member LLC on my attorney's advice, with me as the only member, and I left the paperwork on our kitchen table for about 4 days. Grady saw it. He never brought it up. I armored that store in September. You cannot put a 1-year-old into an LLC. I found that out in March. The text came on a Tuesday, about a week out. Come home Saturday, I've got a surprise for you. My husband said he had a surprise. In the Army, we have a different word for that. And I did not use it at the time, because I was 32 years old and I was tired, and my husband was being sweet to me for the first time in about 4 months, and I wanted it so badly that I did not look at it. I want you to hear that plainly. I wanted it. He asked what time I'd get in. I said probably 4. Then 2 days later he asked again, what time on Saturday exactly? And I thought that was excitement. That was a call time. I took 14 days of leave starting Friday the 13th. Marlowe screamed from about mile 400 to mile 470, somewhere in the mountains where the radio doesn't work, and I pulled into a gas station outside Somerset and fed her animal crackers off the hood of the car in the cold, and she thought that was the funniest thing that had ever happened to anybody. I remember that. I remember it better than the rest of the day. It was the last hour of my old life, and I spent it in a gas station parking lot with a baby and a sleeve of crackers, and it was good. I got to Bellwood at 4:10. There were 9 cars on Ridgely Street, and I remember thinking, huh, and then not finishing the thought. I came through my own front door with my daughter on my hip and a diaper bag on my shoulder, and the room was full. 30 people. My mother-in-law's whole side, cousins I'd met at our wedding, 2 of Grady's uncles, and they were sitting in folding chairs. The metal kind, the kind with the church's name stenciled on the back. And I want you to sit with that detail for 1 second, because I didn't for another 9 days. Nobody borrows 30 chairs for a surprise. You borrow 30 chairs for an event. There was no cake. There were no balloons. There was nothing on the counter at all. Not one thing in that room said party. Perrine was in the middle of the sofa with her hands folded. Grady was standing, and nobody stood up. That's the part I still feel in my chest. 30 people watched a woman walk in with a baby after 10 hours in a car, and not one person stood up. Grady took a stapled packet out from under a magazine on the coffee table, and he dropped it. He didn't hand it to me. He dropped it on the table so it made a sound. And he said, "To the room. Not to me. She isn't mine." And 30 faces turned toward me at exactly the same time. Nobody gasped. Nobody looked shocked, because none of them were hearing it for the first time. I was the only person in that room finding out. Perrine lifted her arm and pointed at the door. "Leave. Right now." And here's what I did, and I have had a lot of time to think about this. I said nothing at all. I didn't argue, I didn't cry, I didn't ask a single question, because 9 years in uniform had taught me that letting people see you bleed is a tactical risk. So I stood there in silence with my daughter on my hip, and I listened to 30 people decide that my silence was a confession, and I could hear it happening, and I could not stop it. Grady picked the packet back up off the table, and then the front door opened behind me. He was about 50, in a windbreaker, holding a clipboard. He didn't look at Perrine. He didn't look at Grady. He didn't look at the 30 people in the folding chairs. And I've thought about that since, because it meant he'd done this in a lot of living rooms and he had a policy about it. He looked at me and he said, "Fonda Sutton?" And I said yes, because I'm the kind of person who answers when somebody says my name, which is a thing I have had to make peace with. He put the papers in my hand. He said very quietly, "I'm sorry, ma'am." And I believe he meant it. And then he left. Divorce complaint. Filed in Blair County on March 5th, 9 days before. And clipped behind it, an emergency custody petition. My husband filed for divorce 9 days before he swabbed anything. Think about that with me. The lab report wasn't the reason. He didn't find something out and get his heart broken and file papers. He filed papers, and then he went and got a prop. And 30 people from his mother's family sat in borrowed chairs and watched me get served in my own living room at a party I'd been invited to. You've been waiting for somebody to walk through that door and save me. So was I, honestly, for about 4 seconds. Nobody did. That's not how this one goes. I know exactly how long I was in that house because I checked the clock in the car afterward, twice, the way you do when you don't trust your own head. 90 seconds. That's it. That's the whole ambush. I did 3 things. I walked back through 30 people without saying anything to any of them, and a woman I'd sat next to at Thanksgiving in 2023 pulled her purse in against her leg as I went past, which is a thing I'd only ever seen people do in cities. I carried Marlowe out to the car and I buckled her into her seat, and my hands were completely steady. That scared me more than the room did. 9 years of training and my body just went ahead and ran the checklist while the rest of me was somewhere behind it. And I clipped the chest strap and checked the tightness at her collarbone the way I do every single time. And then I closed the door. And then I backed out of my own driveway. My daughter had existed in that house for 4 minutes of her entire life, and she was already an exhibit. That ended in 90 seconds, and it never started again because I never took her back inside that building. Not once. Not to get her things. Not for a holiday. Not ever. I drove 12 miles to a Days Inn on Plank Road in Altoona, and I got a room with 2 beds, and I put her down in one of them. And then I sat on the edge of the other one with the bathroom light on so I could read. People always ask me the same question, and I want to get out ahead of it, so here it is. I did everything right. Everything. I'm not being defensive. I'm telling you the facts, because the facts are the reason this happened the way it did. My grandmother's store went into a single-member LLC in September of 2025, with me as the only member on the advice of an attorney I paid for. The inheritance sat in a separate account under my name only, and in 3 years I never once commingled a dollar of it with anything marital. I never used it for a car payment. I never used it for a vacation. I kept the receipts in a folder because I'm the kind of person who keeps receipts in a folder. My separate property was untouchable and I knew it. And here's the thing. So did he. He saw that LLC paperwork on the kitchen table in September, and he understood in about 9 seconds that the store was never, under any circumstances, going to be his. So he stopped looking at the store. That's all that happened. That's the whole engine of this. I armored the one thing I could armor, and he simply walked around it and put his hand on the one thing you cannot put in a filing cabinet. You cannot put a 1-year-old into an LLC. There is no form. I sat on the edge of a motel bed at 2 a.m. with a court summons in my lap, and my daughter breathing 4 feet away, and that was the sentence going around in my head. And it's still the sentence. I read the custody petition 3 times that night. The argument was clean, and I mean that as a professional. It wasn't hysterical. It didn't call me names. It said, the mother is absent. The mother is subject to deployment. The mother resides 640 miles from the child's extended family and community. The mother's presence in the child's life is intermittent. And then, in the alternative, and here's where it got surgical, the child is not of the marriage. Attached, Exhibit C, a sworn affidavit, signed by Doss Merrill, who has worked the counter at my grandmother's store since 1997, who taught me how to cut a key when I was 11 years old, who came to Ollie's funeral in a suit that didn't fit him and cried harder than I did. One line. In 2 years I have seen Captain Sutton in the store on 11 days. I sat there in that motel, and I got out my phone and I went back through my leave calendar, my flights, my drives, 3 years of it, and I counted. And I want to tell you that he lied. He didn't. 11 days. It was 11 days. Doss Merrill put his hand on something and swore to it, and every word of it was true, and that is exactly what made it the most dangerous piece of paper in the stack. You can cross-examine a lie. You cannot cross-examine a true sentence. You can only stand next to it and hope somebody asks a second question. Somewhere around 4 a.m, I made myself do the hardest thing in this entire story, which was to sit in that motel room and look at it from where Grady was standing. 2 years. Call it 700 mornings. 6:30. In the dark. In February. Unlocking a door and turning on the compressor and starting the coffee in a pot older than I am. He knows every farmer in 2 counties by name, and he knows which of them are behind, and he carries them anyway, quietly, the way my grandmother used to, and I did not teach him that. He looked at a store that was dying slowly, and he saved it, and I want to be extremely clear. He did not save it because he loved me. He saved it because he loved it. And his name is on nothing. Not the deed, not the sign, not the LLC, not a single sheet of paper in that building. He walked into his own kitchen in September and saw a document that told him the thing he'd built with his hands was legally sealed away from him forever, and he never brought it up. Not once. For 6 months. I understood him completely, sitting there at 4 a.m. I want that on the record because it would be so much easier for me if I hadn't. He wasn't wrong about the store. He was just willing to put my 13-month-old on a coffee table in front of 30 people to get it, and that is a different conversation, and it doesn't have a second side. Bellwood has about 2,000 people in it, and I had been gone for 9 years, and I found out that week that neither of those facts protected me even slightly. 4 days after the ambush, I went into the Rite Aid on Main for diapers and wipes, and one of those little sippy cups, and 2 separate people I have known my entire life did not look at me. Not a snub, exactly. Just a fascinating, sudden interest in a shelf. A woman I sat next to in 4th grade turned her cart around at the end of an aisle and went the other way, and she wasn't fast enough about it, and we both knew. Perrine had been working. Church on Sunday, the salon on Tuesday, Haas's on Wednesday night where half the town eats. And I want to give my mother-in-law her due here, because she's smarter than people gave her credit for. She never once said I cheated. Not to a soul. She said there was a test. That's it. She'd get this look, and she'd say, quietly, that there had been a test, and then she'd let 2,000 people build the rest of it themselves out of their own materials. That's how it's done. You don't tell a town a story. You give them the first sentence, and let them enjoy writing the rest. By the end of that week, I understood that the verdict was already in. Nobody in Bellwood ever said the word to my face. They just stopped saying my name. I want to stop and give you one thing right here, because it's the entire reason I'm still standing. If anybody ever hands you a document that's supposed to end your life, read the last page first. All of it. The tiny print at the bottom that nobody reads, the part that looks like a legal formality. That's where they keep the truth, because legally they have to put it somewhere. If that's useful to you, subscribe. I'll keep telling these exactly the way they happened. Della Prowse practices family law out of a converted dentist's office in Hollidaysburg, and she charges $290 an hour, and she took a $4,000 retainer off my credit card before she read anything, which I respected. She read the petition in about 6 minutes. Then she told me 3 things fast in order, with no comfort attached to any of them, and I wrote them on the back of the motel receipt. 1. The UCCJEA. Jurisdiction over a custody case generally sits where the child has lived for the last 6 consecutive months, and Marlo had lived at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, her whole life. Pennsylvania might not even have the right to hear this. 2. The Service Members Civil Relief Act. I'm active duty. If military duty affects my ability to participate in a civil case, I can request a stay, and it's automatic for 90 days. 3. My Family Care Plan. Every soldier with a dependent is required by regulation to have one, and mine was signed in November of 2025, and it lays out in 22 pages exactly who has my daughter, when, and why. So I sat in that office and I understood, with total clarity, that I was winning. Legally, I was already winning, and it wasn't close. And I felt worse than when I walked in, and I couldn't have told you why yet. Della took her glasses off. Captain, she said, you're going to win in June. I need you to understand that's not the same thing as this being over. On the 22nd of March, I drove to the store at 6:15 in the morning, before Grady got there. I have a key. I own the building. I want to say that plainly because for a while I forgot it. I didn't go inside. I went around the back, to the alley, where my grandmother put 2 green recycling totes in 2004 and where they have been ever since because nothing in that building moves unless somebody dies. And I stood there in the cold and I went through them. Flattened AgChem cartons, a pizza box. Junk mail addressed to my grandmother, still, 3 years later. And down at the bottom, folded but not torn, a white prepaid mailer from a home DNA testing company. Kit inside gone. Return label peeled off. And on the lid of it, printed and barcoded, a kit ID number. He threw it out at work. That's the thing I sat with in the alley for a while. Not at home. At work. Because at home, his mother might have found it, and his mother believed him. Which meant, on some level, in the part of him that still functioned, my husband knew this was garbage that needed to go somewhere it couldn't be traced to him. I'm a logistics officer. Do you know what my entire job is? Knowing where a thing was, who had it, when it moved. I stood in the alley behind my own grandmother's store at 6:15 in the morning holding a barcode, and for the first time in 8 days I was not afraid. The next day, I went back to 214 Ridgely to get Marlowe's things, on a schedule Della arranged, with Grady not there. Which is how those things are done, and I don't recommend the experience. Her crib, her books, the little chair. And in the closet of the spare bedroom, where Perrine has kept things for years because her own place is small, there was a shoebox. I did not have to open it. I want to be honest about that, because it would be nicer for me if I'd walked past it. I opened it. Divorce papers from 2003. Wendell Lennox and Perrine Lennox, Blair County, and under them, a wedding photograph that had been cut. Not torn. Not burned. Not scribbled on. Not shoved in a drawer face down. Cut. With scissors. In a clean, straight line. Carefully. Patiently. The way you'd trim a hem. The man had been removed from the frame and set aside, and what was left was a 40-year-old woman in a white dress, laughing at something outside the picture. Wendell left her in August of 2003 for a woman he met at work. 2 kids at home. And she kept the half with herself in it for 22 years in a shoebox in a closet in her son's house. She never hated me. That's what I finally understood, sitting on the floor of that spare room. She decided about me in 2003, and then she waited 22 years for a woman in a uniform to walk through her son's front door. That report didn't convince Perrine Lennox of anything. It gave her permission. You can understand a person all the way down and still not hand them your child. 2 in the morning on the 24th of March, Days Inn, Plank Road. Marlowe asleep in the other bed, bathroom light on and the door pulled to about 3 inches. I went to the lab's website and I found the box where you enter a kit ID. It asked me who I was in the test. Not whether I had the right. Who I was. Because there is no chain of custody on those kits. Nobody verified anybody's identity in the first place, which is the whole point, and it cuts both ways. I registered as a tested party and I downloaded the PDF, and then I read it the way a logistics officer reads anything, which is from the bottom up. Page 3. Very bottom. 8-point type. This test was performed without chain of custody. The identities of the tested parties were not independently verified. Results are for personal knowledge only and are not admissible in a court of law. The report wasn't fake. The lab was right. His own piece of paper says, in print, that it cannot prove anything about anybody, and he read that, and he used it anyway, because it was never, ever meant for a judge. Then I went back to page 2. The tested parties table. Alleged father. Sample collected March 9th, 2026. Child. Sample collected March 9th, 2026. And I sat up straight on the edge of that bed, because I heard my husband's voice saying she isn't mine in front of 30 people, and because I knew exactly where my daughter was on the 9th of March. My leave ended on the 27th, and I drove the 640 miles back, with my daughter asleep behind me for most of Ohio. On the 31st at Fort Campbell, I did in one morning the only thing 9 years in uniform is actually good for. I pulled records. The sign-in sheet from the Child Development Center for Monday, March 9th. Sutton, Marlowe. In at 07:15. Out at 17:32. My initials. Her teacher's initials next to mine, because 2 people sign a child in. Always. Every day. And I had rolled my eyes about that policy for a year. The gate log at gate 4. My plate. 703. And I already knew where Grady was on March 9th, because Grady is where Grady always is at 6:30 in the morning. Della's paralegal pulled it in a week. A point of sale receipt from Sutton Feed and Hardware, Bellwood, Pennsylvania, time-stamped 0641, March 9th. 2 bags of layer feed and a box of roofing nails. So on his own report, the cheek that got swabbed on March 9th was 640 miles away from my daughter's cheek. The United States Army writes everything down. It is the single most irritating thing about the institution, and I have complained about it in 3 states, and it saved my daughter's life, or near enough that I'll never make the joke again. He needed a cheek. His daughter's cheek was 640 miles away, and he could not get to it. So whose did he use? Here's what I did not do. I did not order a kit off the internet. I want that understood, because it's the whole spine of this. On the 6th of April, I drove to a collection site in Clarksville, Tennessee, and I booked a legal paternity test, which is a completely different animal that costs about 6 times as much. A third-party collector I'd never met checked my driver's license against my face. She checked Marlowe's birth certificate. She photographed both of us. She took our thumbprints and put them on the form. She swabbed my daughter's cheek herself. I didn't touch it. I wasn't allowed to touch it. And she sealed the bag in front of me and signed a chain of custody form, and I signed it under her. And it went to a lab accredited by the AABB, $525. And then came the hard part, which is that this only works if he does it too. Della sent a collection invitation to his attorney. He didn't show. She sent it again. He didn't show. So she went to the judge. And on the 9th of April, my husband sat in a strip mall collection room in Altoona, under a court order, white as a sheet, and let a stranger check his ID and roll his thumb onto a card. He knew the answer before the swab touched his cheek. Everybody in that room knew. Same lab technology, same swab, same science as the $29 kit he threw in my grandmother's recycling. One difference. Somebody watched. The email came on the 17th of April at 4 minutes past 11 in the morning, and I read it standing next to my car in a parking lot on post. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. Grady Lennox is not excluded as the biological father of Marlo Sutton Lennox. I got in the car. I didn't start it. I sat there and I read it maybe 6 times, and then I put the phone face down on my leg. And then I did nothing. I want you to understand what I mean by nothing. I didn't send it to Della. I didn't send it to my mother. I didn't send it to Grady, or to Perrine, or to anybody in Bellwood, or to any human being on this earth. I sat in a parked car and was right, by myself, which is a thing I have been extremely good at since I was about 19. There was a knock on my window. First Sergeant Ruth Ann Petrie, 44 years old, who has never once in her life asked me how my weekend was. She looked at my face through the glass for about 2 seconds, and then she said the only thing she says in this entire story. "Ma'am, you gonna send that to somebody, or you gonna sit here and be right by yourself?" I had won. I had it in my hand on the 17th of April in writing, with a seal on it. And it fixed absolutely nothing, and that is the moment I finally understood what my husband had actually done to me. I called Della that afternoon and told her I had it. She wasn't happy. She was quiet for a second, and then she said the thing I had already worked out in the parking lot and hadn't wanted to say out loud. He's going to withdraw. Before the hearing, his attorney will read that result, and the petition will evaporate in about a week. And there will be no June, and no judge, and no courtroom, and nobody in a robe will ever say a single word about any of it in front of anybody. Because he never intended to go to court. He filed the petition on March 5th to make the story real enough to tell. The lab report was for a living room. The affidavit was for a story. He built exactly enough legal architecture to hold up a rumor, and not 1 ounce more. And then he pointed the whole thing at a town of 2,000 people. And if he quietly withdrew, then in the minds of every person in Bellwood, Pennsylvania, this thing freezes forever at its most convenient shape. There was a test, and then they settled it. I would win and be an adulteress until the day I die, and my daughter would grow up in the same 40 square miles and hear it in a parking lot at 15 from somebody's cousin. He never built a case. He built a story. You cannot subpoena a story. Della said, "I can get you a court order. I can't get you a town." I went back up the last weekend in April, and I went into the store at 7 in the morning, and Doss Merrill was making coffee in the same pot he's been making coffee in since 1997. He's 52. He saw me and his whole body went still, and he waited, because he thought he knew what was coming. I didn't accuse him of anything. I asked him one question. "Doss, was the 11 days right?" He looked at me for a long time, and then he said, "Yes, ma'am." And that was it. That was all he was going to say, and he turned back to the pot. And then, with his back to me, in a voice I'd never heard out of him in 25 years, he said one more thing. I know where every bolt in this building is. Then he got the filters down and that was the end of it. He didn't want money. He'd never asked for $1 in his life. He wanted to be seen, in the one building where he'd spent 26 years, by the one family whose name was on it, and my grandmother never saw him, and neither did I, for 3 years, from 640 miles away. He told the truth in that affidavit. Every word. That's the part I couldn't put down, driving back. My husband needed a lie to come after me. Dos Merrill only needed a fact. Della filed our response the last week of April and attached my family care plan, DA Form 5305, signed in November of 2025, 4 months before any of this. It names who takes my daughter if I deploy, short-term and long-term, with powers of attorney and medical releases and immunization records, and a signature from my commander. It is 22 pages long. And I want to be honest about it, because people love this part, and they love it for the wrong reason. I did not have that document because I'm clever. I had it because the Army made me have it. Every soldier with a child has one or they don't get to keep serving. It's a regulation. It's homework. And it happens to be the single most complete record of a mother's care of a child that exists in American life, and my husband's attorney read 22 pages of it and went very quiet. Here's the arithmetic I finally did, at my own kitchen table on post, with a calculator, like a person. In 2 years, I was in that store on 11 days. In those same 2 years, my daughter slept under my roof 631 nights out of 642. Both numbers are true. Both of them are completely, verifiably true. Dos Merrill counted one of them. Nobody counted the other one, including me, until April. One thing, quickly, and then we go to the 2nd of May. If somebody is telling a story about you that isn't true, don't argue with it. I'm asking you as a friend. That's a hole with no bottom in it. Write down the facts and the dates while you still have them, and then go find the room where the story actually lives. That's it. That's all I did. And if this is landing somewhere real for you, leave a comment. I read every one of them. 7 weeks. That's how long it went on. 7 weeks of a town, which does not sound like a war until you've been in one. Perrine at church, Perrine at the salon, Perrine at Haas's on a Wednesday with the whole back section. And in the middle of it, I came up one weekend to sign something at Della's, and I stopped at the food liner in Bellwood for gas, and Perrine Lennox pulled up beside me and put her window down. There were 2 women at the pump behind us. Her son's wedding ring was in that woman's house. Her granddaughter's picture was on her refrigerator. I know it was. I put it there. And she looked at me through an open car window and she said it again, the same way, like she'd been practicing it since March. Leave. Right now. And I said nothing. Again. 7 weeks, and I had not said one defensive sentence to one living human being. And I sat there at that gas pump and finally saw it for what it was. I'd been telling myself it was discipline. Somewhere in there it had quietly turned into a habit. And a habit doesn't protect anybody. It just keeps your mouth shut while somebody else tells your daughter who her mother is. The flyer was taped in the window of the Rite Aid, and in the food liner, and at the bank, and at the post office. Bright yellow. I stood in front of the one at the Rite Aid for a while with a bag of diapers in my hand. Sutton Feed and Hardware. 60 years. Saturday, May 2nd, 10 to 2. Free hot dogs, door prizes, everybody welcome. My grandmother's store opened in May of 1966, and it was turning 60, and I had not remembered, because I was busy. Grady had. Della's paralegal found the invoice later out of curiosity. He ordered those flyers from a print shop in Altoona in January. 2 months before he filed. He had been planning that Saturday since the winter, and his attorney let one thing slip to Della in an email, almost as a courtesy, the way lawyers do when they think a case is basically over. On the 2nd of May, at the anniversary event, my husband intended to announce that he was taking over day-to-day operations of the store. So he didn't just want the building, he wanted the whole town standing on the sidewalk with a hot dog watching him receive it. From a woman every one of them had been told was an adulteress. He booked the room. He printed the flyers. He invited 2,000 people. He did every bit of that for me, and he had no idea. Between the 17th of April and the 2nd of May, I had the result, and I did not use it. And I want to be precise about what that was, because people have called it grace, and it was not grace. I considered every single one of these and then decided against it, on purpose, with a reason. I didn't call Bristol, and I could have. I didn't post anything anywhere. I didn't email that PDF to one soul in Blair County. Not Perrine, not Grady, not my own cousin, not the pastor, nobody. I didn't call Trace Hode on his rig in Ohio and tell him what his wife had done with a cotton swab and his son. I thought about that one at 2 a.m. more than once, and I'm not proud of how long I thought about it. And I didn't say a word to my daughter, obviously, who was 13 months old, and whose only real opinion was about bananas, and that was the one easy thing in the whole business. 15 days. I sat on it for 15 days. Because a true thing said in the wrong room is just another piece of paper, and I had already watched a piece of paper get used in exactly the right room by an expert, and I had taken notes. People think holding it was mercy. It was targeting. On the 1st of May, I printed 3 pages in the front office of a Days Inn on Plank Road at 15 cents a sheet, and the night clerk had to change the paper because nobody had printed anything on that machine since maybe 2019. Page 1, page 3 of Grady's report, the bottom paragraph. I circled it with a pen I borrowed off the counter and gave back. Page 2, the sign-in sheet from the Child Development Center at Fort Campbell for the 9th of March. Sutton, Marlowe. In. O. 7:15. Page 3, the ABB result. Seal, signature of the collector. Thumbprint reference, the number. 45 cents. I've spent more than that on a coffee I didn't finish. I want you to notice what I didn't print, because it took me 2 weeks to figure out, and it's the smartest thing I did in my life. I did not bring his report. Not the whole thing, not the front page with my daughter's name on it and the word excluded. I brought page 3 of it. I wasn't going to stand in a room and call my husband a liar. I don't have to say it. That's what paper is for. I folded them and put them in the inside pocket of my jacket, and I sat on the edge of that motel bed with the bathroom light on again, and my daughter breathed in the other bed, and I thought about First Sergeant Petrie knocking on my window. May 2nd was a Saturday, and it was clear and about 60 degrees, which in central Pennsylvania in May is a gift nobody trusts. By 11:20, there were 90 people in and around that store. A Weber grill out on the sidewalk with somebody's uncle working it. A cooler of lemonade. A vinyl banner from a shop in Altoona, zip-tied to the porch posts. Farmers I've known since I was a kid, in clean shirts. 2 people off the borough council. The pastor from Ledgewood Methodist. And over that front door, where my grandfather hung it in 1966, the bell. My mother came, and she took Marlowe from me at the door and put her on her hip like she'd been waiting 13 months to do it, which she had. Dos Morel was behind the counter in the same spot he'd stood for 26 years. Perrine was pouring lemonade at a folding table like it was her house, and she saw me come in the front door, and her face did something I'd never seen it do. And in the back, near the seed, was Bristol Lennox Hode, 31 years old, with Miles on her hip, 19 months old. I didn't arrange that. I want to say that clearly. She was there because it was the 60th anniversary of the family store, and everybody in that town came. I want to be honest about the plan, too. 3 pieces of paper and 1 question. That was the plan. That was all of it. At 11:45, Grady tapped on the counter with his wedding ring to get the room. His wedding ring. I noticed that from 20 feet away, and I have never stopped noticing it. And 90 people went quiet, and he talked. And he was good. He was so good. He talked about Ollie Sutton standing behind that counter at 86 with a pencil behind her ear. He talked about my grandfather and 1966 and a bell. He talked about how it had been a hard year for this family, and he let that sit exactly as long as it needed to sit. And half the room looked at their shoes, and the other half looked at me. And then he said it. Starting in June, I'll be taking over full day-to-day operations here. And that store came apart. Real applause, the kind you don't fake, and a man named Ab Trossel who's farmed up on the ridge his whole life yelled, "About time, Grady!" And Perrine put a hand over her mouth by the lemonade. And then my husband looked across 90 people directly at me, and he smiled, warm as anything, and he said, "And Fonda came out today. We appreciate her making the trip." 90 people turned and looked at me with enormous kindness. They felt sorry for him. That's what I was standing in. I handed my daughter to my mother, and I walked up to the counter. There was no microphone. There's never been a microphone in that building. 90 people in a hardware store is not a stadium. It's a room, and a woman who briefs at 05:30 can be heard in it without doing anything at all. I said, "Grady." He turned around with the smile still on, ready for whatever this was, because he'd been ready for me to make a scene since the 14th of March, and he'd have known exactly what to do with one. And I asked him a question. "On March 9th, whose cheek did you swab?" He said, "What?" I didn't repeat it. I want to be really clear about this because it's the only thing I did that day that took any nerve at all. I did not repeat the question, and I did not fill the silence, and I did not explain myself. I waited. I'd been waiting 7 weeks. 4 more seconds was nothing to me, and in those 4 seconds, 90 people in that store watched a man fail to answer a question that only needed a name. That's all it took. Not the papers. The papers came next, but they weren't the moment. The moment was a man standing under a sign with his wife's family name on it, in front of everybody he's ever sold a bag of feed to, not being able to say a name. Then he tried. He said, She's not well. She's been going through." And I laid the first page down on the counter. I put them down one at a time, face up, on the wooden counter my grandmother stood behind for 40 years, and I named each one the way you read off a packing list. Slow. Boring. Boring is the whole trick. This is page 3 of your report. I slid it across. It's the paragraph at the bottom. It says the test was done without chain of custody. It says nobody verified who was swabbed. It says the results are not admissible in a court of law. One beat. You read that in March. Then the second one. This is the sign-in sheet from the Child Development Center at Fort Campbell, Kentucky for March 9th. Sutton, Marlowe, in at 07:15. My initials, her teacher's initials. One beat. That's 640 miles from this counter. And then the last one. This one's mine, April 9th. Court-ordered collection. A woman neither of us had ever met checked our photo IDs, took our thumbprints and sealed the bag in front of us. A ABB-accredited lab. Same swab, same science, same everything. And then I said the only sentence in 7 weeks that I let myself have. That one has a chain of custody. I didn't read the number out loud. I didn't have to. It was sitting right there, face up, under the register, and Ab Trossel, 60-some years old, hands like fence posts, who'd yelled about time 4 minutes earlier, leaned over and read it. And then he straightened up and looked at Grady. And every single person in that store watched Ab Trossel do it. That's what I'd come for. Not the paper. Ab Trossel's neck turning. Over by the folding table, Perrine set the lemonade pitcher down and missed the edge, and it went over. My mother-in-law came apart in the middle of the store, 63 years old, at the 60th anniversary of a business her family has never owned a nail of, screaming at me in front of 90 people that I was a liar, that I'd made all of it, that she knew what kind of woman I was the first night her son brought me to dinner, and she'd said so. She'd said so to everyone. And then she screamed the same thing she'd screamed on the 14th of March, and said through a car window at a gas pump in April, "Leave, right now!" And I didn't move. Not 1 foot. I said it at the volume I use at 05:30. Perrine. One beat. This is my building. And there was nothing. She had nothing. There is no answer to that sentence because it's just a fact. And she was standing in the middle of a building with another woman's name on the sign over the door, having just told that woman to get out of it. And 90 people watched her understand it at the same time she did. She stopped talking. Grady never said anything at all. Not then. Not for the rest of that day. And as far as I know, not for the rest of that month. And then, from the back, near the seed pallets, there was the sound of a paper cup hitting the floor. Bristol Lennox Hode was standing there with Miles on her hip, 19 months old, in a little coat, chewing on his own fist, and she was staring at the second page on that counter, the one with the 9th of March on it, and I watched my sister-in-law do the arithmetic. Nobody had to explain it to her. She'd swabbed that child herself. 90 people turned and looked at her, and Bristol said it. Not to me, not to Grady, not really to anybody in the room. He told me it was just to settle something. And then she looked down at her son. Perrine sat down on Doss Merrill's stool. I didn't say anything else. There wasn't anything else. I left all 3 pages lying face up on that counter. I didn't take one of them back. Not one. Because they weren't for me. And I went around the end of the counter and took my daughter off my mother's hip, and I walked out the front door. And my grandfather's bell rang. Same as it has for 60 years. It doesn't know anything about any of us. It just rings when somebody leaves. He withdrew the custody petition on the 12th of May. 10 days. No hearing, no argument, no judge. The divorce finished in November, and he didn't ask for the store because his own attorney had known since March that the LLC was airtight and had probably told him so and been ignored. Grady was never charged with anything. Della was blunt about it. Lying under oath is a crime, and lying in your own living room is a Saturday. He left Bellwood in August and works for an ag dealership somewhere in Ohio, and I understand he's very good at it. And I believe that, because he was. I didn't sell the store. I did the thing my grandmother didn't do. I made Doss Merrill the store manager. $58,000 a year and 10% of the profit, 3-year contract, and he read it twice at the counter with his glasses down his nose, and then signed it and handed it back and said one thing. She'd have liked that online business. Nobody in Bellwood ever said anything to Perrine. That town does its work quietly, in both directions. She stepped down from the hospitality committee at her church in September. She has never apologized, and I have never once waited for it. Bristol texted me on the 4th of May. One sentence. I answered her 4 months later, and we talked. And it was hard. And Miles and Marlo see each other about 3 times a year now. Because those 2 babies didn't do anything to anybody, and that part I had to fight myself over. And I'm still not finished. I'm still at Fort Campbell. It's still 640 miles. People want a scene for the part where I cut them off, and there isn't one. I updated a form. DA 5305, Family Care Plan, revised, Grady's name off it, my mother's name on it as long-term caretaker, initialed by my commander on a Tuesday morning between 2 other things. That's the boundary. That's all it ever was. The 3 pages live in a folder in a small safe in my quarters, and I have not looked at them one time since the 2nd of May, and I haven't told Marlo any of it. There'll be a day. It isn't today. She's a toddler, and the only thing she needs to know about who her family is who comes when she cries. And that question has never once been complicated. People ask me if it felt good. It did. For about 4 days it felt fantastic, and I'm not going to sit here and perform some kind of serenity I didn't have. And then I found out something they don't tell you. I don't get those 7 weeks back. Nobody hands those back. What I got back was that I stopped needing a single person in that town to believe me. That's the only thing I actually won. It turned out to be the only thing I needed. I didn't take my name back from Bellwood. I just quit lending it to them. He stood in a room full of his own family and said she isn't mine, and the one true thing in that whole sentence is the part he never meant. She isn't anybody's, she's her own, and the only people who get to stand near her are the ones who come when she cries. That's my story. 3 pages, 45 cents, and one question that nobody answered. If somebody ever hands you a document that's supposed to end your life, read the last page first. The small print at the bottom is where they have to keep the truth, because the law makes them put it somewhere. And if you know somebody who needs to hear that today, send it to them. Thank you for being here. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.